Welcome back everyone to the return of the server weapon ranking series. So in case you don't know or you're just generally unfamiliar, we here at Lon'qudor have a surprisingly large Discord server for what a small channel we are. It's constantly active, it's filled to the brim with inside jokes, and for the longest time people have been asking me to cover their custom TF2 weapon ideas. I was reluctant to as most of them sucked, but after getting some good ones, I eventually made a series out of it. This was a very popular series in the context of my channel's history, and it felt great to cover these ideas, as these were the ideas of so many people who just wanted to have their voices heard, and therefore I was more than happy to give them a platform to do so. However, after a time, and me just not being able to control it, there were too many weapon ideas I just could not keep up, our rules were not adequate enough, and therefore I had to silently scrap the series. But after making some major adjustments to how weapons can be submitted, and filtering out all the good and bad ones, the series is finally back, and I'm going to be covering all the weapons I missed from November 23rd up until now, and then the channel will reopen for you to post your new weapon ideas. This was the criteria as voted on by my viewers, and in case you would like a little bit more context, you can watch this video here linked down in the description below. But the intro is getting long enough as is, so I feel I should just start. Basically how this is going to work is that I'm going to be covering several of my viewers' submitted weapon ideas, and I'm going to be rating them on my tier list here. And in case you're unfamiliar with the tier list, it looks like this. So as you can see, we have our weapon ideas along the bottom, and I'll be dragging them into the respective tiers. Now, it's red here because you want to aim for balance. Imagine this a bit like a target board, and it gets weaker and weaker as it goes out. So you want to aim for balanced. Something could, for example, be strong or too strong, or it could be weak or too weak. So now we have the miscellaneous tiers. So these are purely idea related. So potential means the idea has potential. These are irrelevant or balancing. It means the idea has potential, and it could, just with maybe a couple tweaks, be something that we could potentially see in TF2. Now, needs rework means the idea is completely and utterly unimplementable. The idea could just not work in TF2 whatsoever. Again, this isn't necessarily to balancing, for example. It doesn't mean it's too strong, it doesn't mean it's too weak. It just means the base idea of what the weapon is going for cannot exist within TF2. And then of course we have the big head tier, because why not? I'm really sorry for that really long explanation. No other videos in the future series will have an explanation that long, but just because it's been almost 3 months since the last one, I feel I needed to recap things. Anyway, let's actually start now. So the first weapon we're going to cover today is called the Booster Shot, and this is a medigun. So the stats are as follows. Overheal does not decay, and you gain a 100% max overheal bonus. And the negatives are that on death, all overheal immediately decays, and this weapon has no overcharge. Wow, what a place to start. Okay, so Overheal is actually an insanely strong ability. People do not understand how strong Overheal is. The ability to give a scout 185 health, regardless of whether it decays or whatnot, is insanely good. And it seems to be that the person who designed this weapon probably doesn't understand how good Overheal is, which is why I have a huge gripe with the next stat, the plus 100% max Overheal. So the negatives are very interesting on this weapon. On death, all overheal immediately decays. So for example, you could have your entire team overhealed and not have it decay, but the second the medic dies, all of that health is gone. And the no overcharge thing is probably the most make or break thing about this weapon. Now, I do believe we can possibly design a medigun with no overcharge and make it balanced. But if you're giving up the overcharge, you need to have some insanely strong fundamentals, and this weapon's fundamentals are too strong. So, the Booster Shot is a textbook example of what I consider to be needs a rework, or maybe even potential, because I do genuinely think that we could design a medigun that doesn't have overcharge and the fundamentals aren't too strong. I do think that could be done, and I'd like to make a video on that. So that's why I'm actually moving it from needs rework to potential, because the idea has potential, but this just cannot exist in the game as is. This is a horrifically imbalanced weapon, but nevertheless a fantastic idea. The Ballistics is the next weapon we're going to cover today, and might I just say, I love the idea of giving Demo Man a riot shield. That is just cool, and I love the description of this thing as well. It's cheeky, it's the kind of thing you'd see on old-fashioned cosmetics. But okay, so the stats of the Ballistics are plus 40% bullet damage resistance on wearer, and a plus 35 fire damage resistance on wearer. And this comes at the cost of increased knockback from explosives. Now there's the alt fire thing, however it says attack power, I believe this just to be the normal shield mechanics. So, the idea of giving Demo Man a riot shield is a cool one, but I have two gripes with this. First of all, riot shields are actually really big, and this would take up a lot of the view model. Think, for example, the Persian Persuader with its shields. Of course you could have mini models on, or the mini HUD, or whatever it's called, but even so, the idea of this could be a little bit difficult to implement, because if you make it too small, it's just going to look weird. You make it too big, you can't play the game. Now, obviously, the second thing we need to talk about is the bullet damage resistance. The idea of giving bullet resistance to a Demoman shield is a very good one, however, I don't think it should be as high as 40%. At most, I think a bullet damage resistance should be around 10%. And I also have a couple gripes with the knockback on this thing. I don't quite understand why we would be taking more knockback. I don't understand what stats incentivize giving this thing a downside. I really don't know. But I don't think giving a shield insanely high bullet resistance and then having to take more knockback from explosives is a good thing at all. Ballistics, where do we put you? I think this might have to go into needs rework. I promise you, not all of the weapons we have today are bad, not all of them are terrible, but an insanely high bullet resistance and then taking more knockback from explosives? This is an idea that cannot be fitted onto a Demoman shield. The ideal, for example, bullet resistance can, but not both of these stats combined. The Smokescreen Shooter is next, and this is an interesting concept for a flare gun. So after landing a flare, you create a region of smoke that obscures the vision of anyone in it, and explosives and air blast can remove this. And this comes at the cost of extinguishing teammates on hit. Now, because it specifies at the top, same as flare gun with these changes, I don't know if that means it still crits on shot. Because if a flare gun does not crit on shot, we have found ourselves a major issue. If this flare gun does not crit on shot, then I think that's fine, but if this flare gun does still crit on shot, I think this weapon is insanely overpowered. Now, the whole concept of a smoke screen is very interesting, however, I do think there should be some fall off. Like, for example, it only creates a smoke screen at a certain distance, because, well, otherwise you could just spam this in people's faces and use it to escape. That might sound like a good idea, but this would be incredibly annoying to fight against, as you would just never be able to see the entire game. These segments are going to get a little shorter, I just had a bit more to explain at first, but now when it comes to ranking the smoke screen, I genuinely don't know what to do with this. If it crits on shot, okay, let's assume it doesn't. If it doesn't crit on shot, then I'm going to put this into 2 weak, because I do think the idea of a smoke screen could exist in TF2. I do think it could. However, having a flare gun that does not crit on shot means, like, yeah, it would be nice to obscure snipers, but you just have the scorch shot, which already burns them. And so that could be a huge problem. If this does crit on shot, this is too strong, because it's literally just a flare gun, but with these changes. So I'm going to put this in 2 weak. I think it's a cool idea. I do think the idea could exist in TF2 in some form, as long as it were heavily modified with cooldowns and all sorts of things like that. But this weapon as itself, I believe, is 2 weak. Wow, I picked some difficult ones for this video, didn't I? Okay, so the next one is the Banner Blade. This is a melee for the soldier, has a large melee range, deploys in holsters slower. So, on deploy, it activates your banner regardless of how full it is. And on holster, this weapon preserves the banner you have left, and you can still gain boosts towards that banner whilst the weapon is active. This comes at the cost of all of your remaining rage disappearing if you switch off this weapon without getting a kill. So, this doesn't actually sound as overpowered as you think it would be, because you remember this is on soldier, the second slowest class in the game. So you could, for example, rocket jump into the enemy base, switch to this weapon, but then you can't escape, otherwise you'd lose all of your rage. Now, the strength of this weapon actually depends on what banner you pair it with. If you were to pair it with the conch, it would be insanely strong. If you were to pair it with the buff banner, it would also be incredibly good. And if you were to pair it with the battalion's backup, I don't think it would be as good, because if you're putting yourself into a situation where you're jumping towards the enemies, you kind of need to kill them before they kill you. And I don't think extra defense is going to help with that. I think extra attack and extra speed would. So I rather think this is a pretty fantastic idea for a weapon. I do think it's just so entirely dependent on what banner you pair it with in terms of strength. So I don't know. I'm going to put it in strong. It's not too strong, remember, because this is soldier. If you were to, for example, have the conch, you would be healing on hit and you would be boosting, and that would be great. But if you were to pair this thing with the buff banner, the boosts wouldn't be nearly as good. But I still think this is an incredibly good idea for a weapon. I do think it could work. Maybe too strong? No, I'm going to put it in strong. It's not, for example, needs reworks, okay? The idea of this weapon could work in TF2, but this just currently as is a bit too strong. The Assassin's Assault is our next weapon, and this is a very interesting concept for a sniper rifle. a plus 20% movement speed while scoped in exchange for minus 25 health when equipped. How on earth do I judge this thing? It's a bit difficult to gauge just how strong movement speed while scoped is. Obviously, if you're going to be moving very fast, you're going to have to relearn your muscle memory and it's going to be harder to hit your shots. But at the same time, you are slowed down whilst you're moving, obviously, and therefore that makes it easier for other people to hit you as well. So this would not only mean you'd have to relearn this new movement speed, but other players would as well. Now, as in terms of increments, is 20% really the strongest thing in the world? I'm not too sure. But I'm really sorry, I don't have an opinion on that stat. I don't know how good movement speed whilst scoped is. Maybe someone in the comments could let me know, please, what they think. But I just don't know, personally. Now, the minus 25 health on Wearer really isn't that big of a downside, as the only thing you're going to be worrying about snipers is other snipers who can kill you instantly, or maybe scorch shots from Pyro, and that would be a bit annoying. But I'm really sorry, I don't have too much to say. The downside isn't as strong as it is on, say, other classes, but I don't know what I think about the upside. I'm really sorry, I don't know. So I've taken a gander through the internet, various subreddits and whatnot, and it seems to be that movement speed while scoped, increasing it would be a good thing. Now obviously it sounds like it would be a good thing, but just when it comes to muscle memory, that's something I am very, very difficult of relearning. So I don't know. The health stats really isn't that big of a problem for Sniper. If you get hit as Sniper, you're only going to be hit by other snipers generally, and therefore you're going to die. That would of course be a problem when it comes to, say, Scouts, but it wouldn't be a problem when it comes to Spies. So that stat really isn't that strong. Oh, I don't know. I don't know. Someone's going to hate me for this. Someone in the comments is going to yell at me for this. I'm putting that into balanced. Because I just think Scout, obviously being one of Sniper's counters, would have a relish at this, because it does mean he could one-shot you. But then the 20% movement speed, is that really that big? I don't know. Maybe we'll put it into weak and move on. Next up, we have the Panhandling Plagiarism, and these are a pair of boots for the engineer, so this will be a secondary item. The stats are as follows: plus 15% movement speed, plus 10% jump height, plus 10% max primary ammo, and negates all fall damage. Now, okay, so the first one we need to look at here is the movement speed. Plus 15% movement speed is the same speed that a Pyro would run at with the power jack. That is faster than the Medic and Spy. That is not good. Plus 10 jump height really doesn't overly matter. I mean, maybe to an engineer, maybe you could get some sneaky tele spots there, but this is specifically designed, I assume, for Battle Engineer. Plus 10 max primary ammo, that would be interesting. However, if as an engineer, you've always got dispenser nearby, so it's not that strong. Negating all fall damage is once again a nice thing, but not that strong. So basically, all of the stats on this are kind of a little bit meaningless, except for the 15% movement speed, which is almost encroaching absurd. That would make Engineer the second fastest class in the game. I don't think that's a good idea for a secondary. Regardless of whether it's passive or not, I don't think that's a good idea. So, Le Boots going into too strong. Purely for the movement speed. Okay, that's not a good idea. Yes, obviously he would still be a weaker Scout, but that is not a good idea. Now, you could have a passive secondary for a Battle Engineer. That is a good idea. But the speed isn't, and everything else is kind of just a bit meaningless. So yeah, that's going into too strong for now. And then by two completely unrelated different people, another Engineer passive secondary was uploaded the same day. This is the third pocket, and it replaces the secondary item. So it gives you a plus 50% metal capacity and plus 10% primary ammo, and then another plus 10% more metal gained from ammo packs. This comes at the cost of a minus 10% less ammo gained from ammo packs. A 50% increase in metal is nice. That would bolster the Engineer's metal up to 100. And I assume this thing was designed to work with the Widowmaker, as by pairing it with the Widowmaker, you would completely and utterly negate the downsides of this secondary. One thing I should say is that not all secondaries need downsides. This seems to be a very common theme amongst the weapons that have been submitted in the channel. A secondary means you are giving up a weapon, and therefore that alone is a big enough downside as is. So not all of them need downsides, but something like this I'm actually fine with having a downside. 10% more metal gained from ammo packs is a nice thing. Again, it's not the most effective thing in the world, it's just an extra 20 metal, but it's still a nice thing. Now, the plus 10 primary ammo and the minus 10 less ammo gained from ammo packs are two things I'm very interested in knowing. How would this affect the Widowmaker? If the Widowmaker purely uses metal, then you'd assume that these stats wouldn't affect it whatsoever, and nothing would change. But the idea of this weapon is that it's implied to work best with the Widowmaker or just kind of battle engineers as a whole, so I'd be interested to know how that works. But overall, I actually really like the idea of the third pocket. So, somebody somewhere's going to have a gripe with this. I'm actually popping that into balanced. It's close to balance anyway. Giving up the pistol as a battle engineer is a big thing, and you're going to need a big thing in return. And I think this weapon is a big thing in return. It greatly helps out the Widowmaker, which is not very friendly in terms of, missing your shots. So it greatly helps out that, helps with the production of minis, and even having a bit of bonus metal left to help with your teleporters. I think this thing is the closest thing we've had to being balanced on this list today. I know somebody somewhere's going to have a gripe with that, but I genuinely do. So the last weapon we're going to cover today is the Turkish Gobbler. This is a lunchbox item for the heavy, and eating it heals 375 health and can overheal you by 100 health. This comes at the cost of a 50% slower recharge rate, a longer time eating, and minus 33% max overheal. Okay, there's a lot to break down here, and none of it's particularly good. So healing 375 health is unnecessary, as heavy only has 300, as this would not heal overhealed health, as it doesn't specify it would. However, it would overheal you by 100 health, so after eating this thing you would be a 400 health heavy. Now, the slower recharge time is not good, because the sandwich already takes 30 seconds to recharge. That would mean this thing takes 45 seconds to recharge, that's almost a minute. The slower eating time isn't too big of an issue. I feel that's an actually perfectly fine downside to give a sandwich, for example. I think that's fine. But the 33% max less overheal is an interesting stat, because that's not overheal from the stats of this weapon, that's just overheal in general. Heavy desperately needs his overheal. And, well, I don't really know where else to slot this in, but overheal, at max overheal anyway, for every class takes 15 seconds to decay. That is not enough time to get in and out of combat, and that's with max overheal as well, which is 150 health. Only having 100 health, it's not very good. And the last thing I need to mention about this weapon is that sharing it with a friend adds 5 seconds to the cooldown time. That is 100% the single worst thing you could ever add to a sandwich, as that would discourage it from sharing it with your medic, who needs the sandwich more times out of 10 than the heavy does. This item, as a concept, I do not believe could ever go into TF2. Now, obviously it could, like coding wise, it could go into TF2, but just the idea of not sharing your sandwich, healing unnecessary amounts, having some very random downsides, and having some really big ones at that, just, it couldn't exist. It's not a very good idea. I'm a heavy main, I have some authority when speaking with this. This could never work. And that's all I'm going to cover today. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. This video was deliberately a bit longer as it is currently being premiered. Hello everyone in the chat. Other episodes in the future series to come will be much shorter. Do not worry, they will not all be 18 minutes. Apart from that, the weekly challenge has not started yet again, as we are still making some renovations to the channel, so you might have seen there are a couple items I didn't cover in this video, and they were going to be the weekly challenge winners. I'll announce them for the next episode. But regardless, thank you very much everyone. I'm really sorry I cancelled this series originally, and I'm very happy to bring it back, and I will see you later down the sunny road.